Kalispera σας. Good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. Welcome to the celebration of the Bicentennial of the Greek War for Independence, organized by the Hellenic Society Prometheas under the auspices of the Committee Greece 2021 and co-sponsored by the Greek Orthodox churches and all Greek American organizations of the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. I am Zoe Lafis, a board member of Prometheas, and I am delighted to welcome you and guide you through our program. We start with the national anthems of the United States of America and of Greece, performed by our dear Sofia Pelekasi, and we will continue with a rendition of the Ti Hypermacho hymn from a performance by the internationally acclaimed choir of Dimitris Papapostolou.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets ringing, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave, Σε γνωρίζω από την κόψη του σπαθιού την τρομερή. Σε γνωρίζω από την όψη που με διαμετράει τη γη. Απ' τα κόκαλα βγαλμένη των Ελλήνων τα γυρά και σαν πρώτα ανδριωμένη χαίρε ελευθεριά και σαν πρώτα ανδριωμένη χαίρε ελευθεριά και σαν
pleasure to welcome the President of the Hellenic Society Prometheas, Ms. Magdalini Kantartzi.
Good evening. Thank you all for joining us to celebrate this historic 200th anniversary of the Greek War of Independence. I would like to thank our distinguished guests, Her Excellency, the President of the Committee Greece 2021, Gianna Angelopoulou Daskalaki, Her Excellency, the Ambassador of Greece to the United States, Alexandra Papadopoulou, and our spiritual leader, His Eminence Archbishop Elpidophoros of America. Last but not least, I would like to thank the Greek Orthodox churches and all Greek American organizations of the Washington, D.C. area for co-sponsoring tonight's event. A special thank you to Professor Michael Wood, who, despite being faced with deadlines, finishing a book and other speaking engagements, wholeheartedly accepted our invitation to talk about one of his favorite topics, Greece. Prometheas continues its 40-year-long tradition of celebrating the Greek Independence Day annually. Every year on this day, we honor a hero or a heroine, Greek or Philhellene, who sacrificed his career, fortune, and sometimes his or her life in the struggle for the independence of Greece. Today, we are not honoring one, but all heroes and heroines who helped Greece break free of Ottoman rule. Greeks and Philhellenes, Americans, Europeans, and others. Others like Haitians. Haiti was the first country that recognized the independence of Greece and had sent 100 men to join in the revolution and 45 tons of coffee to raise funds for the cause. Americans had this love for Greek democracy and the Hellenic ideals, and it was not just a philosophical kinship. Americans have stood in solidarity with Greece since the beginning of the Greek Revolution. Many fought side by side with Kolokotronis, Karaiskakis, and Lord Byron, like George Jarvis, Captain Georgios the American, or Zervas, as the Greeks called him, or Samuel Gridley Howe, Jonathan Peckham Miller, or James William, an African-American sailor from Baltimore who fought in the Battle of Navarino. There were also the intellectuals like Edward Everett from Massachusetts, the first classical scholar to combine his academic pursuits with activism on behalf of the Greek people, or the poets like James Gates Percival or Fitz Greig Hallock from Connecticut, the American Lord Byron. Marcos Botzaris was the poem that he wrote, and he describes in the most touching way how Botzaris, after winning a decisive victory against the Ottomans, was killed, and yet how death was welcomed by this victorious warrior. And then there were many Greek orphan children that were brought to the United States by American Philhellenes during the Greek Revolution. Two of them, in particular, Photios Frisk and John Zachos, never forgot Greece and its strides for liberty. They also, with their Hellenic ideals, contributed to this country's democratic principles, working to abolish slavery and discrimination. I would like to end with a few words by George Jarvis, whose grave is in the courtyard of St. John's Church in Argos, Greece. Remember me, my friends, who here from freedom's cause remains, in Grecian seas, in Grecian plains, to break the most inglorious chains and seek humanity. And this is what we are doing this evening. We honor all our heroes and heroines that helped Greece become a free nation. We are indebted to them, and we will remember them forever. Thank you.
I am delighted to welcome to our gathering Her Excellency Ioanna Angelopoulou Daskalaki, President of the Committee of Greece 2021, and the torchbearer of this historic commemoration of the bicentennial of the Greek War of Independence. As a citizen of the world, Ambassador Angelopoulou Daskalaki chaired the successful Athens 2004 Olympic Games, which celebrated the return of the Olympic Games to its birthplace. Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Your Eminence Archbishop Elpidophoros, dear Ambassador Papadopoulou, dear Madam President of the Prometheas Society, and dear friends. The anniversary of 200 years after the revolution of 1821 carries a unique symbolism for Greeks worldwide. For this reason, I am particularly honored to be invited to greet the event organized by you, the Hellenic Society Prometheas, the oldest Greek cultural society in Washington, D.C., as far as I know, an event the Committee 2021, Greece 2021, has placed under its auspices. Besides its historical significance, today's event is a reminder of the close Greek-American ties we have maintained and valued for 2 centuries. This relationship is based on our shared values and ideals. It is well known that the ancient Athenian Republic inspired the American founding fathers, and that the young democracy that emerged from the American Revolution is referenced in the 22nd verse of the Hymn to Freedom, Hymnos για την Ελευθερία, written by our national poet Dionysios Solomos. We certainly cannot forget the American Philhellenes, such as Samuel Gridley Howe, William Townsend Washington, who came to offer their help to revolutionary Greece. The past continues into the present thanks to the active Greek diaspora and its significant and valuable contribution to American society in entrepreneurship, science, politics, culture, business. Events such as this one prove that despite the physical distance that separates us, the Greeks of America have an undying love for the fatherland and preserve strong ties with it. Our committee, Greece 2021 Committee, considers it vital that Greeks worldwide actively celebrate the 200 years after the revolution. It is our role to rally Greeks everywhere to coordinate the anniversary events and support as many projects and events as possible through our numismatic program's proceeds. I hope you have seen the commemorative collection of coins of our numismatic program, because it is comprised of 14 coins of unique collectible and especially sentimental and symbolic value for us all. These coins are a series of 2 coins made of a combination of metal and polymer material in blue, imprinted with the first 2 coins of the Greek state, phoenix and drachmi. A series of 8 coins in silver, imprinted with the expansions of the Greek state through the depiction of the personalities associated with every Greek region. For example, Theodoros Kolokotronis, Pavlos Melas, Eleftherios Venizelos, Rigas Phereos, and so on and so forth. And then, the highlight, a series of 4 gold coins depicting the evolution of our flag, the Greek flag, the Greek people's national symbol from the revolution to the present day. So, we invite you to look at the collection which is available online, through eShop, and support the program. I beg you and I thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, in closing my brief greeting, I would like to congratulate the Hellenic Society Prometheas for their remarkable undertakings in preserving, spreading, and supporting Greek culture. Finally, I would like to thank all the participants in this event, particularly His Eminence Archbishop Elpidophoros, the Ambassador of Greece to the United States of America, Mrs. Alexandra Papadopoulou, and Professor Michael Wood.
I am honored to welcome Her Excellency, the Ambassador of Greece, Alexandra Papadopoulou, who honors us with her presence today. A diplomat for over 20 years, she has represented the Hellenic Republic in every corner of the world. Ambassador Papadopoulou is an experienced diplomat with a deep understanding of identity and diversity, cherishing the value of civility and continuing engagement. It's always a pleasure to have Ambassador Papadopoulou with us, and we thank her for her steadfast support of the cultural activities of our society. Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
It is always a pleasure to address the friends and members of the Hellenic Society Prometheas. Today, we honor and celebrate the 10-year liberation struggle of the Greek people as they sought to break free from Ottoman rule and become a sovereign state after 4 centuries of subjugation. This year marks the milestone in Greek history, the bicentennial of the launch of the Greek Revolution. In 1821, Greeks set out to shatter the yoke of the Ottoman Empire and create a modern state built on democratic principles, human rights, and the rule of law, becoming thus a model for state organization free from the claws of an empire and setting into motion a new era for Europe. It has been a 200-year path since the birth of the modern Greek state to today, a path full of Laestrygonians and Cyclops, to paraphrase the great poet Constantine Kavafis, but also full of achievements and successes. Greece today is a democratic state, member of the European Union and NATO, a state that has stood on the side of right in all international challenges, including 2 world wars. Greece continues to be a pillar of stability in the region, a member of the European Union, as I said, and an ally that can be relied upon at a unique and geopolitically important position on the convergent path of 3 continents. 200 years after the launch of the War for Liberation, Greece looks to the future optimistically. On this special occasion, and as a member of the international community, it calls on all its friends and partners across the globe to join in the celebration and in the effort to make the world a better place. I would like to thank Prometheas Society and its president, Ms. Katarzi, for all their efforts in the cause of Hellenism and for today's celebration. And Dr. Wood, it's a pleasure and an honor to have you with us. Χρόνια πολλά.
It is with a warm heart that I welcome His Eminence Archbishop Elpidophoros to our celebration. His spiritual example, guidance, and blessings are ever present in the lives of the Greek Orthodox communities which he nurtures. The ministries of the Greek Archdiocese, through our local Greek churches, continue to keep the flame of Greek identity alive as they did 200 years ago. Your Eminence, the floor is yours.
Αξιότιμη κυρία Κανταρτζή, Πρόεδρε του Ελληνικού Πολιτιστικού Συλλόγου Προμηθέας, αγαπητοί προσκεκλημένοι, 2 αιώνες συμπληρώνονται φέτος από την απόφαση των Ελλήνων να επαναστατήσουν κατά των αλλοεθνών και αλλοθρήσκων επί 400 χρόνια κατακτητών τους και να θράψουν τις αλυσίδες με τις οποίες τους κρατούσαν σκλάβους και δεσμίους. Χρονολογία σημαντική και σημαδιακή για κάθε Έλληνα το 2021. Γι' αυτό σύσσωμο το ελληνικό έθνος τιμά και εκτός Ελλάδος σε κάθε άκρη της οικουμένης την επέτειο της ελληνικής εθνικής παλιγενεσίας. Αυτές τις ώρες η μνήμη στρέφεται προς όλες εκείνες τις αγιασμένες μορφές που πολέμησαν, που στερήθηκαν, που βασανίστηκαν ή χάθηκαν στη λέλαπα της Επανάστασης για την ελευθερία και για την αξιοπρέπεια ενός έθνους με μακραίωνη ιστορία και τεράστια παράδοση, την οποία μας άφησε ως κληρονομιά. Αυτές τις ώρες είναι χρήσιμο, πέρα από τους πεάνες, τους λόγους και τα μνημόσυνα, να κάνουμε απόπειρα να εντοπίσουμε σε τι συνίσταται αυτή η κληρονομιά που ανήκει σε όλους και πώς οφείλουμε να την αξιοποιούμε εμείς οι νεοέλληνες σήμερα. Πιστεύω ότι το ήθος, το ύφος, το κάλος, η πνευματικότητα, τα ιδανικά, η εσωτερική ειρήνη, η οικογένεια και περισσότερο απ' όλα η πίστη στο Χριστό, ανέκαθεν άρρηκτα δεμένη με τη ζωή της ελληνικής πατρίδας μας, και η ελληνική γλώσσα, η μοναδική και απαρομοίαστη, αυτή στην οποία διατυπώθηκαν τα υψηλότερα πνευματικά δημιουργήματα κάθε εποχής. Παράλληλα και τα κάθε εποχής μνημεία, διάσπαρτα σε όλες τις γωνιές της Ελλάδος, από τα βάθη των αιώνων ως τη σημερινή εποχή, εκφάνσεις και αυτά της ελληνικής κληρονομιάς μας. Αν ψηλαφίσουμε στην τύχη τα βήματα ενός αντιπροσωπευτικού από τους μεγαλύτερους ήρωες της εθνικής παλιγενεσίας, του Θεόδωρου Κολοκοτρώνη, τότε θα εντοπίσουμε στοιχεία της προσωπικότητάς του που αποτελούν τη συνισταμένη μιας αφάνταστα μεγαλειώδους διανοίας, η οποία διάνοια, αν και δεν είχε δυνηθεί να λάβει καμία μόρφωση θεωρητική, έφθανε σε εκπληκτικά ύψη διάκρισης σε κάθε πτυχή της ζωής του, συγκεντρώνοντας όλα αυτά τα στοιχεία της παράδοσης που αναφέρθηκαν. Ο Κολοκοτρώνης βγήκε στο βουνό Αρματολός στα 15 του χρόνια, ζυμωμένος με το χώμα και το αίμα. Βγήκε στο βουνό για να πολεμήσει τον Τούρκο που του σκότωνε ένα-ένα τα μέλη της οικογένειάς του. Ένας διγενής στα αλόνια του βουνού. Στρατηγικό μυαλό, κοφτερό, καθαρό μυαλό, να κόβει περισσότερο από το σπαθί του. Άνδρας με ευφυΐα και τόλμη στρατηγικού νου. Παράδειγμα λεβεντιάς ελληνικής που ρίζωσε και άπλωσε κλαδιά από τις Θερμοπύλες, από τους Μαραθώνες, τις Σαλαμίνες και ως τον Γρανικό ποταμό και τα βάθη της Ασίας. Έφυγε στη Ζάκυνθο και σώθηκε από τους διώκτες του. Από τότε φάνηκε η ικανότητά του να είναι νικητής. Τα ιστορικά γεγονότα είναι γνωστά. Καλαμάτα, Βαλτέτσι, Τρίπολη, Ναύπλιο, Δερβενάκια και τόσα άλλα. Δεν λησμονήθηκε η προσευχή του στο Χρυσοβίτσι που έλεγε «Παναγία μου, βοήθησε και τούτη τη φορά τους Έλληνες να ψυχωθούνε». Ούτε λησμονήθηκε και ο λόγος του ότι ο Θεός έβαλε την υπογραφή του για την ελευθερία της Ελλάδος και δεν την παίρνει πίσω. Κολοκοτρώνης, συνειδητός πιστός, μαρτυρεί σε ώρα κρίσιμη τη σημασία που έχει για τον Έλληνα η πίστη του στο Θεό και που δίνει έκτοτε το παράδειγμα του δημόσιου άνδρα που δεν ντρέπεται να μαρτυρεί ελεύθερα και να στηρίζεται πνευματικά σε αυτήν. Τον κάλεσαν μετά την απελευθέρωση να μιλήσει στα παιδιά του πρώτου γυμνασίου Αθηνών στις 8 Οκτωβρίου του 1838. Επειδή ο χώρος ήταν στενός, πήγαν στη γειτονική Πνίκα. Εκεί, καταλήγοντας το λόγο, ο Κολοκοτρώνης είπε στα παιδιά τα εξής: «Πρέπει να φυλάξετε την πίστη σας και να τη στερεώσετε, διότι όταν επιάσαμε τα άρματα, είπαμε πρώτα υπερπίστεως και έπειτα υπερπατρίδος». Όλα τα έθνη του κόσμου έχουν και φυλάτουν μία θρησκεία. Να μη έχετε πολυτέλεια, να δοθείτε εις τας σπουδά σας και καλύτερα να κοπιάσετε ολίγων 2 και 3 χρόνους και να ζήσετε ελεύθεροι εις το επίλοιπο της ζωής σας, παρά να περάσετε 4-5 χρόνους τη νεότητά σας και να μείνετε αγράμματοι. Να σκλαβωθείτε στα γράμματά σας, να ακούτε τις συμβουλές των διδασκάλων και γεροντοτέρων και κατά την παροιμία «μύρια ήξευρε και 1000 μάθαινε». Η προκοπή και η μάθησή σας να μην είναι μόνο για το άτομό σας, αλλά να κοιτάζει το καλό της κοινότητος και μέσα στο καλό αυτό βρίσκεται και το δικό σας. Έτσι κατακλείει ο Κολοκοτρώνης την ομιλία του στους μαθητές. Στην πρωτομή του Κολοκοτρώνη είναι γραμμένη η φράση που είπε στα παιδιά του, καλώντας τα στις τελευταίες στιγμές του να τα αποχαιρετήσει. Τους είπε: «Ελάτε, πάρτε την ευχή και να είστε μονιασμένοι». Αυτός που είχε αναδειχθεί ως αρχιστράτηγος του αγώνα, είχε απελευθερώσει τον ναύπλιο για να φυλακιστεί στο Παλαμίδι, αυτός είχε βιωμένη στη συνείδησή του την ανάγκη να υπάρχει ομόνοια, την ανάγκη να υπάρχει κατανόηση, ελευθερία, για να συνεχίζεται η ζωή και να προκόβει κάθε λαός, πολύ περισσότερο ο δικός του λαός, η δικιά του πατρίδα. Αυτά τα στοιχεία περιληπτικά και επιλεκτικά είναι όσα περίπου μας κληροδότησε ο Θεόδωρος Κολοκοτρώνης. Είναι όσα υπήρχαν πάντοτε στην ψυχή του ελληνικού λαού και δεν πρέπει να τα λησμονούμε ποτέ. Αν θέλουμε η Ελλάδα, αν θέλουμε η πατρίδα μας να ζήσει στους αιώνες και να εορτάσουν και οι νέοι της αύριον πολλές εκατονταετηρίδες όπως αυτοί που εορτάζουμε εφέτος οι Έλληνες σε όλο τον κόσμο. Η ομιλία του Κολοκοτρώνη στην Πνίκα αυτό ουσιαστικά μας διδάσκει και αυτό ουσιαστικά μας κληροδοτεί εκ μέρους όλων των αγωνιστών του 1821. Χρόνια πολλά.
It is with great pleasure that I introduce our main speaker, Professor Michael Wood, whose work many of you may already know. Professor Wood joins us from his native England, where he is Professor of Public History at the University of Manchester. He's a historian, a broadcaster, a writer, and a prolific filmmaker and presenter of over 100 documentary films on history, travel, and culture, some of which were accompanied by best-selling books of the same titles. Professor Wood's research, books, and films span a wide range of geographical areas and chronological periods with interest and care for cultural and humanistic facets of life, and a marked dedication to bringing history to life for the general public. Professor Wood has loved Greece since his teens, and since then has traveled to Greece extensively. He is the author of the epic PBS documentary, In the Footsteps of Alexander the Great. He is also a strong supporter of the Greek Archaeological Committee of the United Kingdom, which supports the education of young archaeologists. We could not think of a more suitable person to talk to us about the legacy of Greece, reflections on the 200th anniversary of the Greek War of Independence. Dear Professor Wood, welcome. The floor is yours.
Greetings, friends, fellow lovers of Greece and members of the Hellenic Society Prometheas. It's a really great pleasure to, as well as an honor, to be asked to speak to you today. And I hope you're all keeping safe and well in these still very challenging times. I do wish, especially though, that we could all be together today in DC in person. Over the last many years through our friends in PBS, we've loved our association with the United States, and we often come to DC to talk over future projects. In fact, I've got a very strong reminiscence of a Greek connection here, which is of coming to DC to pitch the idea of following the route of Alexander the Great and doing the series about the great Alexander for PBS. And I pitched it to Jennifer Lawson, who was the much loved head of programming at PBS, but also, of course, one of the very distinguished members of the civil rights movement in the 1960s. And I was concerned that Jennifer might think that this story was really one about dead white men. And Jennifer said, no, Michael, no. The story of Alexander and the story of the Greeks is a legacy for the whole of humanity, whatever our background. And I was very touched by that. And it is an important thing to hold on to, I think. So we've stayed in DC many times. And actually, I confess to you, we often used to make a special trip to Alexandria to have a meal at a place that friends used to go to, a little Greek taverna called a Kritikou. And I'm sure many of you know it. There's nowhere that the Greeks haven't been, I guess, including the US, since they first made that settlement in New Smyrna Beach in Florida in 1768, when 400 or 500 Greeks from Ionia and the Marni and Crete, and some from southern Italy too, escaping poverty and oppression, came to the States and put their roots down. For the Greek community in America, it's a bit like the Pilgrim Fathers, isn't it? So this year we are celebrating the beginning of the Greek War of Independence in March 1821. It's a symbol for me and for so many people of what the Greek legacy means to the world. The Greek legacy over more than 2,500 years. And it's a theme that really deserves a more serious and expert analysis than I'm capable of. I'm not going to try and tell you the story of the Greek War of Independence. I mean, that would take an evening in itself. I want to just try and set it in a wider picture. And really this talk, I have to say, is a homage to Greece and to the Greeks. So I'm going to have to beg your indulgence tonight. It'll be a personal talk because I've loved Greece and the Greek people and their culture for most of my life. And it's not possible for me to talk about it dispassionately. If I can add a little word about myself, I was born in rainy Manchester, an industrial city in the north of England. And my American friends say, oh yeah, it's like Pittsburgh. Although I must say that as a Mancunian, that Pittsburgh and Manchester are both, as I know, great cities. And as a kid, I read about Greece and the Greek myths, the tales of Troy, Jason and the Argonauts, all those wonderful legends, the Golden Fleece. And ironically, all those years later, I made films about the tale of Troy and the Golden Fleece. And I read books about Alexander the Great as a kid. And years later, again for PBS, I made films about the amazing story of Alexander. But that was the world of the imagination, travels in the mind, if you like. My first travels in Greece were when I was in my late teens, and I hitched. We did that in those days from Britain to Greece more than once. And I remember my first day leaving Athens, that first time. I was a romantic kid, and I decided I was going to walk the dozen or 15 miles, whatever it was, from Athens to Elefsis, the sacred way, the Ara Odos, to see almost as if the spirits of Greece could still be touched. Of course, it was a horrendous modern highway, hard to find. And it was only in later life that I realized, of course, the spirits of Greece, the ancients as well, can still be touched, but in today's people, in the living culture of Greece, you can still touch the spirit of Greece when you're around a taverna table with friends, eating Greek food, listening to Greek music and seeing the dance. You know, that's it. That's what's come down. And that time, I took the little train across the Corinth Canal into the Peloponnese, and I can still recall the thrill of arriving in the evening at a little halt in the middle of nowhere with a station sign that read Mykanni, Homer's Mycenae, the throne of blood, the capital of Agamemnon. And I can remember the thrill of walking up the long lane shrouded by cypress trees, a couple of miles to the village, and checking into a taverna called La Belle Hélène, which was the same house that Heinrich Schliemann had lived in when he excavated the astounding treasures of Mycenae, opening our eyes to the ancient civilization of Greece, 150 years ago. And I hitched around the Peloponnese at that time. I slept out on the mountainside of Mistra with Henry Miller's book, The Colossus of Marousi, in my rucksack, heeding his advice to drink in the light, as all travelers to Greece must. And then I got the ferry to Crete, and I began to understand something big about Greece and Greek history. Crete, of course, is the center of the earliest civilization of Greece, although it was a Minoan civilization. And Crete I've always seen as a kind of mini continent, a couple of 100 miles long, touched by the climate of the Sahara. The latitude line that runs through it goes through the middle of Tunisia. It's halfway to those other worlds of the Near East and Africa. And there in the shipping office in Heraklion, they were selling tickets on their old ticket boards to Beirut and Brindisi, to Haifa and Alexandria and Marseille, where Greek navigators and traders had sailed in the 8th century BC. The Golden Greeks, as the great archaeologist George Milanas loved to call them. I had the privilege of working with George when we made our series of films for PBS on the Trojan War, In Search of the Trojan War. Of course, he was an American citizen, although born in Smyrna, Washington University in St. Louis for 30 years, I think. And George had an almost mystical feel for the connection between the living Greeks and the Greek past. I remember saying to him once, George, it's almost as if you knew them. And he said, Agamemnon was my long lost brother. Anybody who remembers George will remember that. That connection was the key. But as Plato said, the Mediterranean is a kind of comforting world. You're never far from land. People live in the Mediterranean like frogs around a frog pond, he said, and it was too small for the Greeks. And in the classical and Hellenistic age, they went across the world to the Black Sea, to Persia, to Central Asia, to India, and even to what must have appeared a rather cold and uninviting set of islands off the shore of Europe, Britannia, about which the Greek navigator Pythias in the 4th century BC wrote in a typically open-minded and generous-spirited way. And that open-mindedness strikes me as one of the really key qualities in the Greek adventure in history, if I can call it that way. The Greeks got everywhere. Even now, scholars think, to China, or at least their influence did, because the new thinking is that the famous terracotta army in Xi'an in China, those astounding terracotta figures, life-size, of the army of the first emperor, were inspired by Greek models in the decades after Alexander, from Greek cities encountered by Chinese traders and diplomats in Central Asia. So, astounding story. And my point about this is, as we're looking in general about the Greek legacy, following their tracks on the ground across the world, you see more than you do in any book, that what an astounding tale it really is. It's a tale of war, of course, of violence and conquest. The Greeks were, no doubt, great warriors, but it's also a tale of cultural exchanges, amazing creativity and adaptability. And as I said, open-mindedness to other cultures. And what they brought to all those other cultures in the world was so useful. The intellectual ideas, mechanical, practical ideas, mathematical, cultural, you name it. It was all so useful that everybody else adopted the Greek solutions. No wonder then that Hellenism spread across much of the known world in the classical period and still informs our core values today. And when you go out east following their track, you encounter cities, living cities that were founded by the Greeks that are still doing very well. Kandahar in Afghanistan, you see it on the news all the time. Ud Sharif, fabulous place in the middle of Pakistan. Khojent in Tajikistan, Alexandria the Farthermost, they called it, Escate. All of them founded by the Greeks. Even the earliest predecessor of Pakistan's megacity, Karachi, has Greek roots. And of course, then there's still Alexandria, the capital of memory, as Konstantinos Kavafis calls it. So the reach of the Greek story is amazing. Greece itself, as you all will know, is a small land, mountainous, rocky islands and archipelagos and peninsulas, small areas of cultivation in many places outside central Greece. It could only ever support a small population. So the Greeks had to go abroad. Take Miletus, the great city on the shore of Anatolia. 90 cities were founded from Miletus over the ancient Greek period. And some of them still survive today in Romania and Bulgaria, in Ukraine and in Georgia, where Greek is still spoken. Unlike, say, India or China, the Greeks necessarily went out to the world. Now, my second big point, reflecting on the Greek legacy, is this. Like the very greatest civilizations, and I'm thinking about Greece, but India, China, Hellenic civilization was able to regenerate itself over thousands of years. We've got the Bronze Age culture, the archaic and the classical, the Hellenistic world empire after Alexander the Great, and then the whole story of the Roman Empire, in which Greece played such a part. Graecia capta, as the Roman poet Horace said, captured Greece, took prisoner its barbarous captor, its barbarian conqueror. What would Roman civilization have been without the Greeks? Greece was the teacher. And then there's the Eastern Empire spreading Christianity across the world, going half the world, going up to Russia, into the Near East, down into Ethiopia, perhaps the earliest Orthodox Christian culture in the world, the 330s AD. And then the Byzantine Empire, whose influence was so huge that it almost is another world empire, certainly deserving its place on all those maps that you used to see in every schoolroom and in a lot of tavernas. Do you remember, where you see the big map of Alexander the Great's empire and then an inset for the Byzantine Empire of Justinian? But the Greek adventure wasn't finished with that, because of course in the three renaissances of Europe, Greek culture again became a touchstone, a vehicle of cultural restoration and renewal, of rebirth, renaissance. Greece was there the midwife too, and we'll come to that with the War of Independence in a moment. Finally, there's the Greek legacy in the Enlightenment and the European Age of Revolution, when Greek ideals of culture and politics and democracy became the currency of educated people everywhere in Europe and in America. And it was then that Greeks in exile, like Adamantios Korais in Paris, you remember his face on the old orange-colored 100 drachma notes? Of course you will. When they began to plan an independent Greece, a war of independence against the Turks. And in 1814 came the Philiki Iteria, supported by secret organization of Greek intellectuals and thinkers and backers abroad. It was actually founded in Odessa on the Black Sea, but supported by European and British and Americans with their money. All of whom, of course, believed passionately in the things that I've just been talking about. that the roots of European civilization lay in Greece, that in fighting for Greek independence, they would be fighting not only for an oppressed people, but for an ideal of civilization which they shared. And of course, some European intellectuals, Lord Byron famously went to fight in Greece during that war. And Byron himself famously died at Missolonghi in the war, fulfilling a kind of promise that he'd made many years before in those immortal lines, standing on the plain of Marathon, going to the Soros, the mound of the dead. And on the soil, he said, where grew the arts of war and peace, with these fabulous lines. The mountains look on Marathon, and Marathon looks on the sea. And musing there an hour alone, I dreamed that Greece might still be free. So that brings us right into the war of 200 years ago. Greece, of course, after the fall of Constantinople in 1453, had been occupied by the Turks. So the war came after a long Turkocratia. The war itself lasted 10 years. There were many struggles, but the resistance and the war of liberation was based on a deep cultural belief. Greek culture had been loyally, tenaciously maintained within the family, by the Greek Orthodox Church, a huge influence at this time, by intellectuals in Greece, in Constantinople, in Europe, and of course, not forgetting the Krivoskolio, the secret schools where in nighttime little kids imbibed the beginnings of their knowledge of Hellenic culture. And the heroes and the heroines of the war of independence, whom we remember today, were men and women of extraordinary courage and public spirit, who were thinking not of themselves and their own lives, but of future generations that lay beyond the imagination, not only of their children and grandchildren, but of untold generations ahead. And it's to them that we are all indebted for their self-sacrifice, their bravery and their suffering. You think of the massacre of Chios or Psara, are tragedies that all Greeks have never forgotten. But the war became an example for everybody in the world who have fought for freedom. To wind up that story, from 1832, when the Greek state was founded, you can see the gradual restoration of Greek culture in the small kingdom of Greece. I'm sure you all know this story very well, and I needn't even summarize it, but gradually expanded between the 1860s and 1947, when the Dodecanese came back to Greece after the Second World War. The acts of restitution, which made the present day boundaries of Greece, it took over a century to happen. And that's within living memory. It's amazing to think, isn't it? Which finally, and I apologize in advance for this being so personal, but the personal is the strongest in some ways, isn't it? This brings me to Greece today, and to a place I've traveled in since my teens, as I told you, and to a particular place that I and my family always go back to every year. The islands have always been a great love of mine. Some Greek friends prefer the wooded heights of the Sporades or Thasos, the north, Chalkidiki, that kind of landscape. For me, and perhaps it's because I come from the cold, rainy, industrial north of England, for me, it's the landscapes of the Cyclades, the Cyclades, that are still the most haunting. Rocky, austere, sunburned, the rare patches of emerald green fertility, eye-popping against the harsh, stony screes of the mountains, burnt out in summer, but in spring a riot of flowers after the rains, and much of the year still overflowing with pomegranates and prickly pear and figs and olives and the vine, the staples of the people for thousands of years. I think we all have I'm sure you all agree, feel the same, whether you're Greek or not. We all have a particular Greece don't you think? A Greece which is real, of course, but also a Greece of the imagination and the spirit. One particular enclave where we can commune with the landscape in Henry Miller's Bowl of Light. And our particular place is a small island in the Cyclades called Amorgos. It has no airport, and that perhaps has saved it from the worst of mass tourism, on which I know Greece depends, but it is a fine line, isn't it? A mixed blessing, mass tourism. The island is only 20 miles long, but as everywhere in Greece, it is a world of itself, with its own culture, its own dialects, its own stories. It's only got about 1,800 people these days. It used to have about 4,000, beginning of the 1900s. Many emigrated to the US, where there's a big Amorgian association. Kazantzakis, the author of Zorba the Greek, spent time there and wrote about the people very affectionately. George Seferis, the great Nobel Prize-winning modern Greek poet, wrote there, stayed there. Nikos Gatsos wrote his famous prose poem Amorgos during the German occupation in the Second World War. So it's an island of poets. It still has poets. Of course, it's changed a lot since the 1970s, as the world has, when globalization touches almost every aspect of life now. But all the islands still gather in the great monastery in November, Chosoviotissa, the huge Byzantine monastery perched on a vertiginous cliff, refounded in 1088 by Alexios Komnenos. The hundreds of island churches, as everywhere in Greece, have their own little festivals. Epano Choriani, on the 15th of August, the day of the Panagia, the people sleep out for the night and cook a great communal meal in the open, as we know from the inscriptions in the church they did 2,000 years ago. At Easter, the icons are carried over the mountain tracks, with some people going barefoot in penance. These ancient rhythms of life there. There was even an oracle, an hydromandion, a water oracle, until the 1960s, amazingly. So proudly, these ancient traditions and customs and the music are still strong there, despite the shift in the island's economy to tourism. Although it's a short summer season, June, July, August, that's it. And then the island reverts to an older world. So that's my little corner of Greece. It seems to me, when we celebrate 1821, when we salute the freedom fighters of 200 years ago and their incredible heroism, what we're really celebrating is the story of the Greeks themselves and their enduring legacy. Because, as my friend Jennifer said at the beginning, it is a legacy for all humanity. The Greeks, of course, now spread across the whole world. In the US too, they've, over the last 200 years, played a great part in the life of the country, great role in American society. The civilization of the Greeks, its significance in world history is out of all proportion to its size, of course. And the continuance of Hellenic spirit in our living present endures strongly today, despite all the changes of modernity. They are still our root in the West. And the Greeks today are still the custodians of that great body of memories, which I've zipped through briefly in my talk today, which we celebrate. And for the next 4 years, we'll celebrate those great anniversaries, the tragedies, and the ultimate triumph of the Greek War of Independence. So I've spoken enough now, and it's almost time for a glass of wine. Is it ever too early for a glass of wine in Greece? I don't know. So let me conclude with a toast to the everlasting spirit of the Greeks. Stiniasu, ke evkaristo parapoli. And I should say, Kronia pola Elada.
Stiniasas, Professor Wood. Thank you for sharing these marvelous reflections with us, and thank you for contributing to the brilliance of the day. We now reach the musical part of our program, starting with a lament of Marcos Botsaris, το Μυρολόι του Μάρκου Μπότσαρη, performed by Sofia Pelekasi. And we will continue with two other dear friends, Maria Paschalidis and Aphroditi Mitsopoulou. Ms. Mitsopoulou is a valued member of our society and a distinguished classical pianist. Ms. Paschalidis is a member of the board of Prometheas and will grace us with her vocals. They will perform the songs Θα βρεθούμε ξανά, composed by Notis Mavroudis, with lyrics by Tassos Samarzis, and Tsamiko, composed by Manos Hadzidakis, with lyrics by Nikos Gatsos, with an appearance of dancers from the Return to Origins troupe, directed by Rena Papapostolou, known to us all for her countless contributions to our community through the years.
Θρηνός μεγάλος έγινε, ναι, ωρε μέσα στο μέσολο εκκλησιά.
Thank you for joining us. Happy 200th anniversary of Grace. Χρόνια πολλά, Ελλάδα!